Hi, my name is Noel Toynton, and I would like to read two short papers on the topic dealing with the pandemic that's in Australia at the moment. The title of the first paper is Rearranging the Deckchairs Whilst Staring into the Abyss. Preamble. I would like to offer a philosophical perspective on the current COVID-19 pandemic here in Australia and proffer my take on what would be a set of policies seeking best practice in view of the various innovations being worked through worldwide. I'm no longer registered as a professional health worker, 40 years as a psychiatric nurse, and only present the following as my contribution to this current debate purely from a philosophical standpoint, albeit also as a call for action. From my researches conducted online, in the light of apparent evidence that seems to clearly support those adaptations highlighted in this presentation, I wish to propose an integrated set of policy guidelines in order to advance what I believe would be best practice. In my opinion, there is an urgent need for political leadership to immediately lift its game, and I believe this is genuinely the perception of the public as well. As we all stare into this imminent abyss, the last thing we need is a poorly informed leadership merely rearranging the deck chairs. There is much talk about flattening the curve. This exponential growth in the number of people being infected by this virus. Perhaps the mortality rate of this illness is only 1% or thereabouts. Still, that is a large number of people when you realise, as Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, bluntly put it, that between 60 and 70% of the population will become infected at some time in the near future if this pandemic is not brought under control. Spread across the community, that is a large number of people, and many of us are going to have loved ones, friends and associates die in the course of such carnage. Now, lest it be thought to be only the predicament of the elderly and those whose health is already compromised, let me soberly remind my reader that 38% of cases requiring hospitalisation in the US comprise patients between the ages of 30 to 54. But if nearly 3/4 of the population of any community in general is going to get infected, and most will recover, why this escalating panic? Why actively disrupt the health of our economies and head us all into the depths of a recession that can only endanger the livelihood and well-being of even more people? Because our health systems are on the verge of being almost totally unable to treat the sick and dying, let alone also attending to those who need either immediate or elective surgery, or who are in need of specialised treatment in order to recover from other forms of illness and trauma. No one wants their sick parents or friends or children or loved ones in neglected beds, placed on trolleys in busy passageways, on seats in waiting rooms, or unattended stretchers in car parks, slowly dying a painful death, in a malaise characterised by soaring temperatures along with severe difficulties in breathing and so on. With a suitable degree of care, many of these very sick people would otherwise survive. In this regard alone, a flattened curve would allow our hospitals to function and properly attend to those who need such expert specialist attention. Moreover, a flattened curve would also give us more time to ramp up testing, prepare facilities for observation, isolation, monitoring, and when needed, direct those patients urgently in need of intensive care to a facility where such specialist attention could be effectively delivered. Getting straight to the point, in a summarised set of 8 headings, what integrated policy directions are urgently required? Total lockdown immediately, testing, tracing, tracking, triage, treatment, retesting, and a promptly targeted removal of communities from lockdown. Total lockdown immediately. Either the Australian government has been brilliant in preparing the public for total lockdown, or that they have started to stumble towards the inevitable, as is the case, for example, in Europe and large parts of America. To quickly flatten this epidemiological curve, a total lockdown is immediately called for. Now, general consensus is that deaths start to appear about 3 weeks after a person becomes infected. So if the number of confirmed cases were, say, 10,000, then 3 weeks later 100 deaths would be expected. But many more people would need to be hospitalised, perhaps 15%, perhaps as high as 20%. Moreover, a large fraction of those people would need intensive care. Inadequate medical attention at all stages of this illness would elevate this base level of mortality. So when you see the latest statistics, do the maths. Flattening the curve would also allow additional time to prepare facilities, accelerate the acquisitioning of testing kits, and so on, and reduce the demand on our hospitals under already a level of stress, even before this outbreak. The second heading is testing. As has been reiterated by many experts, we need to test, and test again. If this pandemic can be slowed down, then it would give our health system and allied services a better chance to identify those who are infected, isolate the same, better treat them, and further slow down the spread of this viral infection. On such calmer waters, we also stand a better chance to track down those individuals who have been in contact with such confirmed cases and further arrest this outbreak. In the light of these imperatives, we need to test as many people as possible. Indeed, when finally feasible, test the entire population, and then, again, as caution dictates. Tests in China conducted outside or inside fever clinics can be conducted in under 4 hours, assisting triage. Faster testing regimes are also on the horizon. Testing also allows patients to be discharged from hospital or isolation once they have repeated tests confirming their non-infectious status. Therefore, crucial to the policy outcome of quickly returning a population into a state of targeted removal from lockdown, repeated testing is the linchpin in expediting this policy objective. In the same regard, repeated temperature checks throughout the community are also a frontline adjunct. Tracing. Tracing people who have been in recent contact with people who have been infected and tracking them down for observation is the next vital step in this stage of interlinked strategies. Most people would be happy to cooperate in this endeavour, given that they would be pleased to know that they could find appropriate forms of immediate referral if shown to be infected. On the other hand, restraining orders or similar might need it, if apparently called for. Humane guidelines should be in place for such enforcement. Tracking. Directly following on from tracing is the tracking down of people who have been in the immediate orbit of infected individuals. A flattened curve must make this task a less onerous pursuit. A nationwide database for such information is called for. Perhaps people could be contacted by phone and either directly contacted whilst in home isolation or proactively able to attend a facility run in parallel to hospitals, never a fever clinic, as instituted in China, for example. 5. Triage. In fever clinics separated from but run in parallel to hospitals, infected individuals generally would need no protection from other patients with the same illness, unless the illnesses are complicated with other infections, like, for example, influenza, common colds, etc. Under those circumstances, such patients would need to be suitably monitored whilst being individually isolated from people with just this coronavirus. On the other hand, medical and allied staff need thorough protection in what has been abbreviated as PPE, personal protective equipment. In the advent of a flattened curve, ICU resources in the nearby hospital may well need to be utilised. However, in the advent of a surge of cases, special sections of a fever clinic would need to be converted into intensive care facilities. From seeing chaotic-like scenes in a world-class intensive care unit in an Italian hospital, and having seen other units, I'm of the opinion that the most effective delivery of care would be better served in long hallways, with the usual access to oxygen, for example, being delivered from a central pipeline along the wall behind this row of beds, without an opposing parallel row of patients who naturally would be looked at as if in better or worse shape by the prior occupants, and vice versa. With the placement of windows in a sterile setting, relevant visitors could also see their relatives, friends, etc. to the benefit of all parties concerned, with a certain degree of privacy also being afforded patients in adjoining beds. But then again, given the urgency of the situation, may well have to make do with the requisitioning of buildings or field hospitals being tasked with this type of purpose. In China, as noted, in or near those fever clinics, they have triage down to about 4 hours. In this process, temperatures are recorded, tests for this infection are administered and get read, bloods are collected, histories are constructed through questioning, patients are tested for flu, etc., and portable CT scans are also used to observe problems in lung function and so on. With requisite speed, efficiency and dutiful care, triage notes who needs intensive care or more general hospitalisation, who needs to be directly headed to an isolation area or needs no admission but only possible follow-up in some form or other. This illness often clusters in families, and it was judged as more expedient to isolate people in a more appropriate setting. In the Australian context, perhaps people should be allowed to self-isolate at home if that were judged to be more appropriate. Either way, in this regard, people would then need to be registered, and services like a home delivery of food and other essentials, internet connections, a continuing of medical monitoring, etc., would then need to be arranged. Obviously, triage is an important step in the institution of this overall sequence of policy directions and would need to be clearly defined policy-wise and charting the course of their associated procedures. Treatment. Suitable treatment needs to be delivered in a proper, appropriate and apposite manner, centred on the changing needs of this type of patient. At the same time, it is to be demanded that medical staff and allied services receive full and adequate protection from this viral infection. Patients with an already compromised state of health also need such complications to be taken into account. Given that one of the key complications experienced by such seriously ill patients is a diminished lung function, then access to sufficient ventilators is a key ingredient in the dispensing of intensive care. Obviously, a flattened epidemiological curve would better serve in overseeing that this specific resource and others would be to hand for this more specialised area of treatment. But given a non-flattened curve subject to exponential acceleration, such devices sadly will never be in short supply until demand for the further procurement of this product finally finds a satisfactory state of equilibrium. As in all forms of treatment, a more holistic approach should be exercised. Therefore, this urgent imperative for an immediate lockdown, the integrated observance of the sequence of policy directives from testing, etc., would better serve our communities, this nation as a whole, and our economic standing in this world as dependent as we all are on a continuation and non-disruption of trade. Despite this pandemic continuing to flare up around the world, such measures would soon progressively release us from the state of a total lockdown, along with its adverse economic ramifications. Indeed, I would conjecture perhaps after 1 or 2 months only. But in this optimistic advent, continuing widespread testing and retesting would be required, especially in regard to overseas visitors, if our communities were to radically free themselves from this otherwise relentless plague. Retesting. In order to advance the successful reversal of a state of lockdown, widespread testing and retesting would be the prime priority to oversee the expedition of this key objective and avoid a resurgence of infections. Is this possible? A successful worldwide response to the 2002-2003 SARS epidemic and the more recent ongoing Ebola epidemic is the new paradigm in this regard. Unfortunately, worldwide containment is not an immediately realizable goal until the advent of a successful vaccine. On the other hand, a partial containment could be successfully instituted in both communities and in this nation of Australia, if, as I believe, all these policy directives were to be immediately instituted. Targeted removal of communities from lockdown. And the final goal of this integrated set of policies, the quick, effective, targeted reversal of this necessary first stage consisting in a total nation lockdown. As for the parameters of this total lockdown, I would let this be left to the formation of a responsible compact finessed between both citizens and our politicians. However, we have seen many organisations, cultural organisers, preempt the disorganised hesitancy of our governments with proactive policies in the same regard. We do not have to leave this communal form of response just to the politicians themselves, who to date have not well acquitted themselves in the same regard. Yes, we have had packed beaches at Bondi, but with the need of a clearly reinforced institution of an adequate degree of social distancing, a few people here and there on our beaches and in our parks is not a subversion of the general observance of a successful lockdown. Perhaps in the same vein, supermarkets should be permitted to stay open for 24 hours. In contrast, public transport could be cut back without making people in this industry redundant, as being trialled in Britain perhaps. Or then again, perhaps transport should be maintained to better maintain this policy of social distancing for all remaining commuters who need to travel. As for schools, anyone with a reasonable disposition would insist that they too be locked down and locked down immediately. A successful total lockdown will more than likely lead to a quicker reversal of this policy. Any sensible parent would insist that this occurs, and many have quite sensibly acted proactively in the same regard. With an epidemic under control, albeit locally and within the confines of this nation, we then soon can all get back to recovering some degree of normalcy. Through testing, tracing, etc., sources of infection would be progressively removed from the general population at large, and a targeted reversal of this policy of total lockdown could then be successfully reversed, just as this now seems to be the case in China. Conclusion. As one successful commenter recently put, This plague is a mirror to our culture. Hopefully, in the manner of our response to this crisis, we will find a benevolent and civilized face kindly looking back at us, despite rampant inequalities. In this thought, I am optimistic that we will not be found too wanting, and will no longer need to fear this otherwise imminent abyss stretching far out before us.